The Vanishing of Clara Thompson. In 1998, in a quiet town in West Virginia, Clara Thompson vanished without a trace. She was last seen leaving her night shift at a local diner, her silhouette swallowed by the thick mist that rolled in from the mountains. Her disappearance left the town haunted, not just by grief, but by something far more sinister. Clara wasn't the first person to go missing in Ravenswood. Over the years, several people had disappeared under eerily similar circumstances, always alone, always at night, and always near the edge of the woods. But the strangest part? Some of them reappeared, different. One such person was George Lively. He had gone missing for 3 days in 1986. When he stumbled back into town, his eyes were glazed, his voice monotonous, as if something had hollowed him out. When people asked where he had been, he simply said, "The whistler took me," before violently convulsing and never speaking again. He was institutionalized and died years later, never revealing more. After Clara's disappearance, her brother, Daniel Thompson, refused to accept that she was gone. He became obsessed, tracking down every missing person case in Ravenswood. His research led him to an old woman named Eleanor Hayes, who lived in the outskirts of town. People whispered that Eleanor was a witch, but Daniel was desperate. He visited her late one evening, bringing with him Clara's old sweater. Eleanor took one look at the sweater and paled. "You should leave this alone," she warned. "Some things don't want to be found." But Daniel insisted. Finally, with a sigh, Eleanor told him about the whistler. "He lives in the forest, in the in-between. When the fog rolls in, he hunts. If you hear him whistling, run, but never look back. He takes those who are lost, and when they come back, they're not the same." Daniel, unwilling to let fear control him, ventured into the woods on the anniversary of Clara's disappearance. The mist was thick, and the silence was oppressive. But then, there it was. A faint, melodic whistling, echoing through the trees. It wasn't a tune Daniel recognized, but it was wrong. The notes seemed to stretch unnaturally, like something ancient trying to mimic human music. He pressed on, his flashlight flickering. That was when he saw her. Clara. She stood a few feet away, half hidden in the mist. Her clothes were the same as the night she vanished, but they were pristine, untouched by time. Her eyes were empty. "Clara," Daniel whispered, stepping closer. She smiled, but it wasn't right. It was too wide, too stiff. Then, behind her, the whistling grew louder. Daniel's blood ran cold. The shadow behind Clara shifted, something moving in the fog, too tall, too thin. He couldn't see its face, but he could feel it watching him. His instincts screamed at him to run. Clara took a step forward. "Come with me," she said in a voice that was almost hers. Almost. Daniel turned and ran. The whistling followed, weaving through the trees, never breaking rhythm. The faster he ran, the louder it became, as if the very air was whistling around him. He didn't stop until he burst out of the woods and into Eleanor's yard. The old woman was waiting for him, a bundle of dried herbs smoldering in her hands. She muttered something under her breath, and as soon as she did, the whistling stopped. Daniel collapsed, gasping for air. When he looked back at the forest, the mist was gone. The trees stood still, but Clara was nowhere to be seen. Daniel left Ravenswood the next morning, never speaking of what he had seen. But the disappearances didn't stop. The locals learned to fear the mist, to lock their doors when the whistling began. And those who didn't, well, sometimes they came back, and sometimes they didn't.